Hi.
So look, it looks like this Hangout is live. We're coming in from NMC17, and we have Bryan Alexander as our special guest, and we have AK there and Greg. So why don't we go to the on-site folks, and then we'll quickly introduce virtuals, possibly now, possibly after they leave, because they're busy with another session coming up. Go ahead, Greg.
Will do. Hi, I'm Greg Dillon from Gordon College. I'm an instructional technologist there. Having a really great time here at the NMC conference with AK and Bryan. Bryan gave a really great pre-conference workshop yesterday that everybody's been raving about, and I'm looking forward to his sessions for today.
Hi everyone, AK, normally a virtual buddy. This time I'm breaking the mold and I'm being on site. I'm an educational troublemaker.
It's crazy.
True. Indeed.
I'm Bryan Alexander. I'm from Vermont, and I've been presenting here and doing media work here, and we'll be presenting more over the next 3 hours and then lighting out for Poughkeepsie for tomorrow's conference. So who else is here? Who else is on this virtual call?
So let's go Chuck, and then Helen, and then Ian, and Terry.
Chuck Pearson of Tusculum College coming to you today from the couch in Afton, Tennessee.
And Helen DeWard coming you from the sunny shores of Georgian Bay in Ontario.
There we go.
I'll go next. Ian O'Byrne coming to you from the Low Country in South Carolina.
This is Terry Green in Peterborough, Ontario. I'm in a computer lab with a couple other people setting up their WordPress accounts right now.
More WordPress.
Thanks, Terry. Ken Bauer, computer science professor here at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Guadalajara. So why don't you tell us, Bryan, what are you going to talk about? What have you talked about already? I know you had something yesterday, and you've got a couple sessions coming up today.
Well, really quickly, and this is kind of like an anthology. Yesterday, we did a pre-conference workshop about automation and education and creativity. So we took a look at the ways that we use artificial intelligence to either assist in creation or actually creating stuff. And by stuff, we're talking about nonfiction writing, fiction writing, images, audio, and video. And along the way, we had discussions about, is this really creative or is this imitation creativity? What does it mean for education? What does it mean for the human race? So that was very, very interesting. This morning, we had a Future Transform session where we had a bunch of people, including the NMC keynote speaker. We also had Matt Warwood, who's been doing this great project about students of the future. We had Maya Grigeva and Emery Craig, who were talking about VR. And then we had a few other people talking about innovation and education. It was just a fascinating discussion. Then in about 13 minutes, I'm going to be talking about future trends in technology and education. Trends that are not based in technology. So I have to convince people that it's worth paying attention to something other than technology. And then from 2:45 to 3:45, I'm doing a presentation about digital literacy and what it is right now in 2017. So that covers a good amount of ground, I think. Any of that particularly interest anybody in this call?
Oh yeah, I'll dive in. So recently I've been writing a lot and thinking a lot about creativity and like divergent, convergent thinking. What is imitation creativity? Like, and how do you see creativity, you know, being more or less important in terms of like what we have available with digital literacy?
Well, that's about 3 great questions, Ian. And I have to ask, how hot is it down there?
It's pretty hot today. Global warming doesn't exist, thanks God, but you know, it's still pretty hot.
That's why people go to the mountains, right? No, I've been there. We talk about imitation creativity because this is a problem of artificial intelligence. And the problem is, if you have a neural net working away, if you have an algorithm working away, is it actually thinking or is it just mimicking the process of thought? And that's a classic AI problem to work through. So when we're taking a look at creativity, when we look at a tool like, say, QuakeBot, the LA Times software that writes articles about earthquakes, you know, is that actually writing or is it pretending to write? Is it actually being creative or is it pretending? So if I can have a random seed that will just generate a random, you know, pick a verb to fit in this sentence, is that creative or is it just pretending to be? That's that mimicking of creativity that we talked about. And it's a fun question because they can dive into, well, when is your thinking actually like that mimicking of thought? When is our creativity actually just the kind of random, I need a word here, give me inspiration, there is none, I'll pick the word fudge or whatever. So that's an interesting issue. This ties into information literacy and digital literacy. Did you say information or digital literacy?
I can go either way.
Well, it ties into digital literacy in general because of the question of automation and bots. So to what extent can we use do we use bots and algorithms in trying to find and create information? So if I'm taking a photo and I have an intelligent filter that suggests the right filter, this is something I need to know how to do to be a digitally literate citizen. For example, Google Assistant, Google Photos Assistant will, every so often, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, it'll generate an animation for you, or a touched up photo for you, or even a film based on what it thinks of your work. So should we consider that? Is that interaction part of the digital literate landscape? For information literacy, there's the question of information literacy is how you find, access, assess, and use information. So to what extent does intelligent software alter that? My favorite example is one that we're looking at very closely. Have you guys followed the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation's acquisition of Meta? So I see some nods and some yes. So Meta is the embarrassingly named, it's an awesome name, I'm just amazed they got it. It's a Canadian software project, so hello Ontario, that was designed to go through and read a ton of science literature and help detect ideas in it. So if AK and I sit down with 100 scholarly articles in, let's pick a field.
Digital natives.
Digital natives, all right? So we're studying this, question of digital natives and so forth. We can take 100 of these articles, and because we know something about the field, we can just deduce concepts from it. Maybe we can make a concept map. Maybe we start noticing a rising trend in X or Y. Meta does this for hundreds of thousands of scientific journals. And so it can trace ideas and concepts across that. So if you're a biologist, you can grab Meta and get ahead of the curve. It's an interesting way of thinking about digital information. The Zuckerberg Foundation owns it now, and that's part of their quest to try to cure a whole bunch of human diseases. So we have to wonder if we're going to be a digitally literate person, if we're doing information literacy, do I need to know how to use tools like Meta? So that's a great question here. You can see this unfolds in a few different ways. How about the rest of you guys? Anything that I'm going to be haranguing people about that especially floats your boats, respectively?
Well, the quest. Feedback. Okay. You can hear me, but I'm hearing myself. Okay, it's better now. The question of automation leads immediately into educational data, and the hobby horse that I've been riding for more than a little bit of time is how much of our educational technology firms, our LMS providers, fill in whatever blank here, is taking what I'm trying to use technology for in the classroom and just harvesting data off that thing for their own profit, for their own use. The exact same thing you're talking about Meta doing, it's immediately you can extrapolate how a thing like that could gather data on students that we're trying to use in an ethical fashion. And my grand question is pushing back against that, the avenues we have at our disposal to keep data out of the hands of the powers that be, the corporations that be.
I think that's a huge challenge and a major issue, but I think it's a problem that is far deeper and far more difficult than we think it is. And for example, I'm fascinated by how in education technology, we've ceased talking about government surveillance. It's just not an issue anymore. Snowden's revelations were kind of like, it's like a Fox Mulder dream, right? Proof that the NSA survey us, and we've totally stopped talking about it, which I find fascinating. It hasn't gone away, it's gotten better. And I think in part this is because of party politics. So in the US now there's this weird sign where we have anti-Trump people who are celebrating the CIA and the FBI and the NSA in their attempt to weaken Trump. which I find just in many ways hilarious, that kind of grimly Russian way. But when it comes, so we stopped talking about that, and that's important. We should talk about that. But when it comes to companies, there are a few other problems here. One is that we, excuse me, that we don't narrow down which companies that we're talking about. I'm not picking on you, Chuck, at all. But we usually pick, we'll say Google. We don't like Google. We're unhappy with this. And then we won't talk about, say, Microsoft collecting data through Bing, because no one talks about that. We won't tackle providers of, say, Moodle hosting or Blackboard or Canvas. We haven't done a full spectrum sweep of, okay, so who's snarfing up all this data at one of our institutions? And once we do that, then we're thrust into a kind of cypherpunk stage where we have so much data we have to control. Then we have to figure out how to rebuild our information architecture in order to keep it out of the hands of predatory third-party providers. No one's serious about this, Chuck. No one's taking this seriously.
Yep, and we are, because we're faculty who are doing our level best to find our own solutions for our own classes at our own particular points in time. Our institution might have their own LMS that they're going through,
Sure.
but we make our own decisions to contract or allow our students to use textbooks that go through other proprietary learning management systems who have their own avenues of gathering up data, who have their own avenues of tracing information. So in the name of academic freedom, in the name of control of our classroom, it's an incredibly decentralized problem.
Or even run our own, Chuck, and then our administrators say, well, what are you going to do with that data, and how are you going to protect that data? And I turn it around and say, well, what about the data you're already collecting in the official systems?
You and me both, brother. Same deal.
And is it secure, right? I mean,
right.
I will trust Google security protocols technically over most campuses simply because they hire better paid talent, so they have more horsepower. That's fine.
Yep.
But if we have our campus, say, Tweed College, and say, Indiana, we set that up and we've got our own DIY thing. We've got our own, it's almost like a Faraday cage for data, right? And then somebody hacks us. Right? I mean, it's, but it gets even worse than that though, because in many ways we come with a Faustian bargain that we're striking. It's not the question of convenience alone. I wrote about this last year. Good friend of mine, is a meteorologist at the University of Michigan. He's been teaching meteorology for a long, long time. And he loves it. He's a storm chaser, right? So he gets to this point where he can now, within a week, I'm going to fudge the numbers a little bit, within about a week of his first class meeting, he can tell about 90% accuracy if a given student is going to pass or fail the class. And for him, because he loves teaching, this is for well, how can I divert resources to this student, or maybe suggest a different class for them to take? I mean, if he were an evil person, you could abuse this in all kinds of ways. I mean, if you have a weeder class on the side, oh, good, and how to maximize it, and how, but that's a really humanitarian goal. Or how about this? There's a couple of projects that can scan social media to look for self-harm and suicidal language.
Yeah.
So we'll go to a college and say, you can do that to your students. You can help save lives. And they're going to harvest your data. That's not an easy decision to make. Richard Stallman can't help me there.
And I'd come right back to that and ask, is that an ethical decision to even allow that surveillance to happen? Are you drawing in information? Because as you say, 90% of the time, we've got some reliable things to do. The 10% of the time where it's not reliable.
So absolutely.
In the case of your professor who has got the means of telling 90% of the time what students are going to pass and fail, have you implicitly made decisions about a student that's going to fall outside of that 90% in either direction?
He has to make that decision.
Right.
And this is one, he's a tenured professor, he's a research professor, so he can do this. So now we have to apply this to a college or to a school or to a university or a system. And we haven't begun to have these conversations. I mean, these are conversations that are very, very tricky, very, very subtle. We need to listen to people like Kathy Davidson, with her wonderful book, Weapons of Mass Destruction. We have to think, but we also have to be really critical and skeptical about the different roles that governments and corporations play, which is why, if I can be a little bit meta, this is a great role for Virtually Connecting to play, because you guys have brilliant people like Chuck who can then ask these questions and we can start having them. I gotta run, I'm sorry. I would love to talk more, but I have to be in front of 100 people. Thank you all for letting me rant. I'm glad to see all of you from multiple states and countries. I hope to see you guys later. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Have an
Thanks,
awesome
Brian.
day.
Please keep talking. Please keep talking. I'll just.
We will.
I'm gonna try and sneak out. I'll do like my lunging in front of the camera.
Subtly sneak out.
Very subtle. You can't see me.
You can go ahead and disconnect, Greg, and we'll continue the conversation here
Okay,
with
great.
the virtuals.
He's too powerful.
I'll see you later, Brian.
Or AK is going to stay with us.
In the role of Bryan Alexander, AK will be taking it on the show. New actor.
Excellent.
All right. So I'm not sure what you guys talked about earlier. Sorry, I missed that session. But is there anything else you'd like to know from sessions thus far?
Well, what's the noise in the hallways? You're there, you're on site, and that's part of why we do this.
It's very active. It's going to see at least some representation from non-North American countries. One of the awards went to UNED in Costa Rica for their innovations. I met with a colleague from Italy and a colleague from Sweden at lunch. Probably try to track them down afterwards and pick their brains some more. It's really great to hear what's happening over in other parts of the world in terms of higher ed, both innovations pedagogically and technologically. And I've been trying to track down the origin of a African proverb, which was mentioned at the keynote this morning, which my initial information seems to make it not an African proverb. But something good for my dissertation. I'm definitely saving it for later.
Oh, wonderful. Why don't you jump in, Helen? What's your thoughts?
Whenever Bryan talks, I have to listen, and then I have to go back and I have to listen again because I'm thinking, did I really catch everything? I only caught about half of what he was talking about. Yeah, some pretty deep ideas. So going into his sessions, I think people walk out, you shake your head and think, like, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Like the question I said, who do you trust? Who can you trust?
Bringing up Snowden, and I remember that day, and bringing it up in class with my students, and now it's just, well, let's just install an Amazon. I won't say the word because everyone's device will turn on in our living room, and yeah, sure.
It is very interesting. I was talking with a colleague this morning about televisions, and this colleague mentioned that they have a smart television. I was in the car thinking, I would never put a device in my house or have that many devices that has microphones like that. We obviously have our mobile phones.
And the terms of service, by default, it's on and listening at all times. Exactly. But nobody reads the terms of service. And especially in Mexico, you tend not to have televisions in a living room type viewing area. They're always in a bedroom.
So I guess I'm a little more conscious about which devices are always on. Mobile phone, I guess I can turn off. Okay, Google. But I definitely would not want to have an Amazon Echo or anything else that's constantly listening. It reminds me, I don't know, how many people in the room are Star Trek fans, or at least watch Star Trek casually enough? Live long and prosper, my fellow Trekkies.
My wife is not around, so but yeah, obviously I'm aware because
it struck me as very interesting as somebody with a background in computer science and in a little bit in usability. I'm thinking, really cool problem to solve from a linguistic and a computational standpoint, to be able to take human speech, convert that into something that a computer understands and spits back out what you need.
Right.
But those types of queries that you use on Star Trek, A, are usually not sensitive. You know, somebody would use a pad or a computer terminal to use sensitive information. And B, sometimes it's just convenience. You're too far from the terminal and you ask something easy, like, you know, what year was the Black album released by the Beatles? I hope that's not a Beatles.
The White album?
The White, the Black.
Black album is Metallica.
Okay. So there you go. But it seems to me that most people even in the sci-fi shows are much more productive with tactile interfaces where a human is quickly interfacing rather than waiting for a computer, even a supercomputer, to understand what you're saying and then give you what you want. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Number one, I just take it as an article of faith that most of the things we actually presently have that can respond to our voice and give us information are behaving in, are programmed to behave in unethical ways. I just take that. I just assume that. So Siri's not on my phone ever. I'm not going to utilize that tool because I don't trust it. It's an interesting problem, and maybe I am a little bit more efficient in a tactile sense. Maybe I would be a bit more efficient if I conversed, but I'm not at the point where I'm willing to go over that bridge. I just simply cannot trust that the likes of Google and Amazon are actually going to be fair brokers when it comes to my personal information. Helen's question is going to loom over this whole conversation. Who can we trust?
Well, whether you're typing it or speaking it, they're still capturing that data. So
this is true. This is a fair statement. But by the same token, when I'm speaking, again, do I have a device in my house? Do I have a device that's enabled that can pick up?
Pick up everything else in the background.
Right. I'm not going to let those devices, as much as I am able to avoid those devices from coming into the home, I'm just not going to let them in.
Or I'm just old and I forget that I have Google Voice keyboard on my phone. Oh yeah, I could have just said that instead of typing it.
That too. We're old by definition, Ken. That's just reality. Go ahead.
The light makes my hair grayer.
Well, I was just going to be a Kofefe joke or Kofifi or however you pronounce it. I wonder if Google transcription or Siri transcription actually is able to transcribe that now. I wonder how quickly the uptake was in getting that into the lexicon.
Yeah. Ian had a good point that, I mean, there's so much data floating around that we're not even thinking about what's already been done.
I mean, the thing is, like, I agree with the leap of faith that, you know, these companies are being honest with us about what they're doing with these tools. But the truth of the matter is that for a while they've been playing fast and loose, and they continue to. You know, we see, you know, what Facebook did with the mood survey. Every once in a while they change things. I'm writing an encyclopedia article now on acceptable use policies. You know, and it's both boring and at the same time terribly fascinating. But I mean, these companies are playing fast and loose. We know that governments are basically siphoning off our data. They at least here in the U.S. they tell us that, you know, it's only those people that aren't from the U.S. that we're tracking. Everybody else here in the U.S. is fine, which we know is not true. We know that businesses, so Facebook, Google's tracking me. The NSA and, you know, the government are tracking me. But what also concerns me is those organizations which started to come to light in the U.S. presidential election is all those corporations that are developing these deep, rich database about us that we don't even know about.
Or even just simple stuff, Ian. I mean, we trust that small startup company that teachers are using. Like, I won't name names, but there's all these quizzing tools and stuff that's free.
Yep.
And teachers always want to use the free ones. And then I'm the nerd who actually opens the terms of service and reads them. And then I explain what's in there. And they're not worried because it's just that small company. But what happens to that data after when they get acquired? Because almost always the exit plan is, when it's actually an entry plan, is to exit and they sell all that data off. And what's going to happen to all that data?
Well, it's like all the Apple devices and the iBeacons. You know, they're like, oh, we're coming out with iBeacons, and you know, they said, well, it's going to be awesome. You'll be able to like walk through a baseball park or walk through the mall, and it will know who you are in real time, real place. and show you an ad. And so you walk by the Gap and it says, hey, we know you've been looking for jeans. We heard you talking about it, and we're having a sale right now. Come on in and we'll give you a deal. And Apple, you know, people are like, oh, that's crazy. We'll never pay for that. And they're like, actually, we've been putting iBeacons in your phones for years.
You're standing up saying, I'm going to go get a beer at the baseball park. And
so
it realizes which left or right you turn when you get to the concourse, and it's ready for you when you get to the.
So, I mean, that's the thing is, like, I mean, to go back to some of the discussion we were having earlier, what do you do about it? You know, do you put your head in the sand? Do you, like, just like all of you, when I go into class and I talk to students and I talk about like iBeacons and, like, you know, at home, we have a Google Home here. I talk, you know, I'll show videos of my daughter learning how to talk. And also, you know, she's 2, she's learning how to talk to us, but at the same time, she's learning how to talk to this device. And so there's many levels of me that have a real big problem with that, but also I'm really, really interested in what the hell's going on there. But I mean, that's when we talk to like normal people out there, which I don't consider us part of that group. No. When we talk to normal people, we tell them, hey, what about iBeacons? What about, you know, these entities or Snowden? And you talk about it and they're just terrified.
Take off that tinfoil hat.
Yeah. So where do we start? Like, what's the starting that dialogue to say, hey, you need to be more informed, more prepared. Here's where you begin. If you want to sit down and talk about the horror stories, we can have that. But it's, you know, when you talk with like normal people, how do you start that discussion?
And these conversations are happening increasingly at the K-12 educational level, where our secondary teachers are just coming into these conversations about data and recognizing what different companies, what different programs are harvesting. And yeah, coming into that conversation from zero can be genuinely exciting. So how do we take this conversation and push it to practical ways we can get pushback? One of the things I really do feel like needs to happen over time is we do need, part of the reason I'm big on open education, part of the reason I know a person like Ken, we need to find paths to extract ourselves from all these major publishers and all of their proprietary tools. There are some really good people who work for those folk. Now, we don't know what their ownership, what their staff, what their ethics is going to look like. Yeah, as Ian just said in the chat, host our own crap. God bless Reclaim Hosting.
Reclaim.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is, like, you talk to, it's not just the privacy and security issues. It's also, hey, I used to know this great tool that I would put blogs into, and I would read it, and it was incredible. Put all this time into Google Reader, and then it's like, oh, it dies off, or extra normal, or we all have our own tools that we love, that the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they die off. And you tell teachers, well, hey, you should use this, but not get too attached because it'll die at some point. And they're like, why would I spend that time learning how to do this when it might die and they might save my data? And I'm like, well, it's incredible. You know, it'll save your life.
But then we talk about the beauty of open data, open protocols, and the fact that Google Reader died, but it's built on top of RSS. And we can find another RSS reader that does pretty much the same thing. And it's not like this big monolithic tool that if it died, oh, crap, what do I use now?
As long as you learned RSS.
Well, you don't even have to.
But if you were just dependent on Google Reader and you just knew Google Reader and you didn't even know what RSS was, then as long as you know what RSS is, you know Google Reader was a tool for RSS. Then you're down the road you just described.
Right. And I think that's where it's on us as educators to really bring that to light to the normals, the muggles.
In some things, it's in some aspects, like looking at the case of Google Reader, it wasn't just that it was an RSS reader, because I think like most people like migrated to something else, and I forget what I'm using now, but I use something that connects to my iPad. But Google Reader was about community, and ever since Google Reader went away, I've started sharing what I would have upvoted on Google Reader or shared and commented in Google Reader on Twitter. And sometimes I get comments from Twitter followers that say, yeah, it kind of looks like you just shared everything you just read, even though it may be like 20 out of 2,000 articles that I went through on my reader, but it's showing up all at the same time for them on Twitter, and they get overwhelmed. So that kind of conversation that happened around in Google Reader, that community, is no longer there. And Google Plus doesn't quite really do it. Twitter doesn't quite do it. It's okay-ish. I think maybe Reddit is a better tool, but there isn't a lot of integration there, and there's duplication. So it's those conversations that are gone with the death of Google Reader. It's not just the reading. So it's interesting to see what the additions to the tool beyond its base capacity have enabled in teaching, learning, and usage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see stuff in the chat, but my eyesight isn't that great.
One of the things I just put in there is that this is one of my, I've spent time with the Mozilla community and like working on the web literacy stuff, and and spent a lot of time using their tools. And I've seen Mozilla do a lot of this. They'll dive in, they'll push an agenda, they'll push a lot of money into an agenda, they'll develop these tools, and then you get out and you use the tools, and then they're like, we're moving on. You start using a tool that you love, that does a lot of great things. Like Popcorn was awesome. I had a lot of students that would come into class, and I would start talking about remix and mashup by dealing with Popcorn, and then it was like, oh, that's dead. And then I hear through the grapevine that there's 2 or 3 other big tools that I use a lot in my classes that are about to die. And so with sort of that stuff, it's like,
but I think it's important that we're teaching them about the design and the process and not the specific tool. And I have that struggle as a computer scientist where we have ridiculous arguments about which language to use in which class. And I don't really give a crap which language we use. We're talking about the concepts of programming, and I can do it in Pascal, I can do it in C, I can do it in Smalltalk or C++ or Java or whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And get it through our kids' heads that the tool isn't the important thing. It's the communication that we actually make happen through the tool.
So how do we build that literacy broadly? That literacy in the computer sciences is obvious, Ken.
Right.
It's absolutely obvious. In the physical sciences, it's slightly less obvious.
Yeah, you should use a metric.
Moving on. In an English literature class,
right,
that is not a part of the conversation that's typically had. And how do we even get our colleagues to be participating in these conversations that say, no, the tool isn't the thing that's super important. It is the skills you acquire in using the tool, maybe even the skills you acquire in taking an open tool and building stuff on top of it.
Right, and the tool manufacturers want us to get hooked.
That's the business model. And part of our major pushback is, in my opinion, being adamant that nobody ever should get hooked to a tool they need to pay for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it seems like this was one of the tensions that people were talking about at Domain 17. They were saying, do we talk about some of the challenges that we had at the beginning of all of this work and the mistakes that we made, or do we talk about where we currently are, knowing that, there are people coming into these tools that are brand new, that don't even know, anything about it. Like, where do you start? So that's part of the challenge, I guess, that we will always have, is that, many of the people that are here on this call have forgotten more about some of these technologies and some of these literacies, in languages than some people will ever learn. So
and I
it's
think,
like,
I think that's critically, and is that we forget that this stuff isn't that simple, and we tend to gloss over so many of these issues because they're just I was just teaching someone how to set up a YouTube Hangout like we're doing now, and I thought, oh yeah, well, just click here, 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 and he's like, that's totally not intuitive at all. And I'm like, yeah, actually, you're right.
Well, that's it. We need to focus on being more approachable and accessible with all of our stuff. You know, it's and think about the normals out there, the muggles, as you said before, that they're not drinking this stuff all the time.
No.
You know, and it's like, because I do it too. I'm like, oh, like, let's start up our own Minecraft server.
Sure, it's no big deal. We'll add some mods, but you got to back patch your client so it's using the older version because we don't want to update our server.
Yeah. And it's like the Star Trek comment before. That's when my wife just like rolls her eyes and she's like, "You have an addiction." She just walks away.
Awesome. Any last quotes, moments from others as we try to wrap this up? Because I know AK and Greg should definitely go. And I'm going to go have lunch before I do another session later here today.
Just added my 2 cents. Free isn't ever free.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole freedom thing is...
No such thing as a free lunch.
Mine's free, though. Oh. Well, thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, AK, for hosting.
Yeah.
And Ian and Helen and Chuck and Terry. And have an excellent afternoon. I'm going to hit the stop broadcast button.
Thanks, all. PB says bye.
All right. Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Signing out from NMC17.
Stay good.